Joining me now, Air Marshal Edward Stringer. Edward, let's talk about that development. Good to see you. President Putin given short shrift by Ukraine when asking for this ceasefire. What do you think the reasoning was behind asking for it? He must have known it would never be agreed to.
Well, Putin has cloaked himself in the robes of Patriarch Kirill, primate of the Russian Orthodox Church, who has made himself very rich under Putin's rule. The Patriarch called for the ceasefire, and Putin has given it him. He will try and claim this. Shows he has some moral standing, but I absolutely can see why it is viewed with great cynicism by the Ukrainians.
What updates are we getting from the ground about what's going on at the moment in Ukraine?
Well, I think to look for the story here, we've got to look behind the headlines. And the fighting still is centred around Bakhmut, and we still see waves of Russian assaults, but the waves have fewer and fewer soldiers in. We see that the artillery support is getting less and less, and so that supports the analysis of both Ukrainian and Western intelligence agencies that the Russians have here largely culminated, which is a technical military phrase, and all it means is the Russians are running out of combat power to achieve anything militarily significant. But go behind the headlines, and in that Ukrainian assessment, buried a little bit further down, there's also their assessment that yesterday the Russians lost the greatest number of troops they've lost in any one day in this conflict. 800 soldiers lost yesterday. And the Russians cannot sustain that. And that means that Putin really has to now think about mobilising, which the Ukrainians assess that the Russians might start today with their next mobilisation. Politically very difficult for Putin for reasons that we have covered before. But also, if he's running out of ammunition even to sustain that relatively small operation around Bakhmut, where is the material? Where are the experienced officers? Where are the experienced NCOs going to come from to allow Putin to mobilise and to produce an army that's going to achieve any more than the forces are or are not currently? So, behind the headlines, this looks to me, very much like Russia is unable to use its armed forces to achieve what it wishes to do on the battlefield.
Behind the headlines, behind the fighting, there are Ukrainians trying to live and work in amongst this, which is so hard to get your head around. But there have been new figures released about the economy of the country, showing that it's shrunk by more than 30% because of the war. What's your analysis of that figure?
Well, once again, the headline 30% sounds dreadful, doesn't it? We look at our own economy at the moment. But once again, go behind the headlines. Well, it's not surprising the economy shrunk. And if you look at one or two main areas of the economy, Ukraine, second biggest producer of grain in Europe, which it exports through Odessa and across the Black Sea. Normally in any year, 50 million tonnes of grain. Last year, down to a quarter of that. A lot of the heavy industry supports the domestic economy in the east. Well, obviously that's been ravaged. But on the plus side, and we see Mariupol here symptomatic of that large heavy industry. But we also see a burgeoning tech sector in Ukraine. And all but 4% of the companies grew last year and are expecting to grow. So actually look behind the headline of 30%, go back to the start of this war, and most international forecasters, economic forecasters, said if this war goes on, then you can expect to see a 45 to 50% reduction in the Ukrainian economy. So 30% shows the Ukrainians have been a lot more resilient than everyone gave them credit for. So put those answers to your two questions together. The Ukrainians doing better on the battlefield, Russian threats of mobilisation looking hollow, the Ukrainian economy holding up better. You can see why Western politicians now might be minded ever more to support Ukraine. So tie those two together and it might explain why President Macron of France has come out today and said for the first time he's going to provide armoured fighting vehicles to Ukraine, and in the tweet supporting that he actually used the phrase Ukrainian victory. These, I think, are indicative of the way the strategic battle is going.
OK, really good to hear from you, Edward. Thank you very much. Edward Stringer there with analysis on the situation in Ukraine.